This happened back in 2007, when I was working IT for a small VoIP and telecom company that's long gone now. It was the kind of place that always felt half legitimate and half scam, but I was young, needed the job, and honestly didn't care as long as the paycheck cleared. I was the only woman on my team, and after a few weeks of proving I could handle the same technical calls and emergencies as everyone else, people finally stopped treating me like I didn't belong there. After a while, I switched to the long, quiet night shifts, Wednesday through Saturday, from 1 p.m. to midnight. It meant I had 3 days off, but it also meant that after 6 p.m., I was completely alone in the entire building. Everyone else would practically sprint for the exit at the end of the day, leaving me surrounded by humming servers, flickering monitors, and silence. The office sat in a business park on the edge of town. Behind it was a stretch of dark woods and a walking path that never had any lights. I used to take short breaks just to wander the building or grab a soda from the vending machine down in the basement. That floor always felt strange, a long hallway lined with windows that looked directly into the blackness of the woods. You could see your reflection perfectly in the glass, and sometimes I'd catch faint movement outside that made me freeze for a second. Probably just deer, I'd tell myself. Probably. One night that autumn, I headed down there around 9 p.m. for a soda. It had been a slow shift, and I was tired. The air in the basement felt colder than usual, heavy and still. As I walked toward the machine, counting coins in my hand, I saw something flicker near the window, a quick dart of movement, like someone stepping back into the trees. I stopped mid-step, heart pounding, and stared into the darkness. Nothing. Not even the glint of eyes, just my own reflection. I told myself I was being ridiculous and hurried to the vending machine. The can clunked into the tray, and I bent down to grab it. That's when I heard a sharp ping. It sounded like metal on glass right behind me. I froze. Slowly turned around. Nothing. But every instinct in my body screamed that someone had been out there watching me. I bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, gripping my soda like a weapon, and locked myself back in the main office. For a while I sat there trying to calm down. It was probably just a branch, I told myself. Or maybe a bird. But then, that uneasy feeling crept in again, that sense of eyes on me. I peeked over my cubicle wall toward the entrance, and my stomach dropped. There was a man standing just outside the front doors, cupping his hands against the glass to look in. He was tall and thin, wearing a dirty jacket, and even through the reflection, I could tell something was off about him. His face looked bruised or smeared with dirt, and he was swaying a little, staring right at the desks. I ducked down before he saw me. The doors were locked, but that didn't stop him from trying. I heard the handles rattle, then shake harder. When I peeked again, he was yanking at them with both hands. Then he stopped, turned, and met my eyes directly through the glass. I'll never forget that look. He didn't blink, just slammed both hands against the door so hard the glass shuddered. I dropped under my desk and called 911, whispering to the operator that there was a man trying to break into my office. While I was talking, the noise stopped. I peeked up again. He was gone. The dispatcher told me to stay hidden, but before I could respond, something crashed against the door. It was a rock. A big one. It cracked the top pane of glass. I screamed and covered my mouth, shaking so hard I could barely talk. The operator asked if he'd gotten inside. I told her no, not yet, but the glass was splitting. She told me to stay down, that officers were already on their way. Those next few minutes felt endless. The building was dead quiet except for my own breathing, until another hit came. Another sharp crash, followed by the distant sound of sirens. When the red and blue lights finally flashed through the windows, I could have cried. I peeked over the cubicle wall and saw one of the doors hanging cracked, the rock lying just inside the entryway. The man was gone. The officers swept the area, their flashlights cutting through the parking lot and tree line. My boss showed up, then my husband, and I was escorted home not long after. I took the next few days off. When I went back, I found out the police never caught the guy. I told them I suspected it might have been connected to a former co-worker who'd been fired a few weeks earlier for stealing phones and VoIP equipment. He knew everyone's schedules, including the fact that I worked alone at night. I quit a month later. The new job was another call center, but it had cameras, security, and people on every shift. I'll never forget that night, though. The sound of that rock hitting the glass, the way his face looked through the reflection, and the awful realization that if he'd broken through just a minute sooner, no one would have known until the next morning. I had just wrapped up my first year of university when I got a job dispatching taxis for my boyfriend's cousin's company. It was a small setup, nothing fancy, but the pay was good, and the boss didn't care if I brought my laptop and played games during my shift. For the first couple of weeks, I worked days, but then the owner decided to make it a 24-hour operation. Lucky me, I got stuck with the night shifts, usually 3 or 4 a week. I didn't really mind at first. I'd worked plenty of late shifts at a coffee shop before, and the taxi office wasn't exactly in a sketchy neighborhood. Plus, I liked the quiet. The driver who usually worked those shifts was a guy named Dave, a big guy, over 6 feet tall and probably 300 pounds. But he moved slow because of his health issues. He wasn't exactly someone you'd call backup if things went sideways, but he was nice enough. That night started like any other. It was dead quiet, around 1:30 in the morning, and Dave got a call to pick someone up in a nearby town, about 15 minutes away. So he grabbed his stuff, drove off, and I went back to my desk to play on my laptop. The front office had big windows, and from where I sat, I could see the front door, part of the waiting area, and most of the parking lot. About 20 minutes later, I caught movement in the reflection of my screen. At first, I thought I imagined it. Then I heard heavy breathing. I froze, looked up, and saw a man sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I hadn't heard the bell on the door ring. I had no idea how long he'd been sitting there. He had a long, greasy rat tail, his face buried in his hands, and he was panting like he'd just sprinted across town. His clothes were filthy. For a second, I thought maybe he'd been in a fight or hit by a car or something. I hesitated, then asked if he needed a cab. Nothing. I asked again, and when he finally looked up, I took an involuntary step back. His face was cut up, blood running down from a wound on his head. He muttered that he just wanted to go home, said he lived about 20 minutes away, and that he wanted Dave to drive him. I grabbed the radio and called Dave, told him someone was waiting at the office. He said he'd be back soon. While I was waiting, I stayed near the front windows where anyone passing by could see me. Something about this guy just didn't sit right. When I looked closer, I realized he wasn't just bleeding from the head. There was blood on his shoulder and down one of his legs. I told him again that maybe he should let me call an ambulance. That's when things got weird. "You don't need to do that," he said. "It's not like I killed nobody. I didn't kill nobody." I froze. "I just want to go home," he said again. "You don't gotta call anyone. I ain't done nothing wrong." I tried to stay calm, but my fingers were gripping the phone. He kept rambling, saying over and over that he didn't kill nobody, and that the guy had it coming. My stomach dropped. He noticed me holding the phone and snapped, "I fell, okay? That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. It ain't like I killed nobody." He got up then, pacing back and forth, sweating and muttering to himself. Every time I thought he'd calm down, he'd start mumbling again about how it wasn't his fault. I just stood there, heart pounding, trying to sound steady while telling him Dave would be there any minute. Finally, I heard the radio crackle. Dave was pulling up. The guy walked out, got into the cab, and they drove off. I waited until they were down the street, then called the cops immediately. I told them everything, the blood, the weird ranting, how he kept saying he didn't kill anyone. Turns out I was right to be scared. The police had been looking for him. He'd gotten into a fight at a bar, stabbed someone with what they think was a pocket knife, and ran off into the night. He must have been hiding or running aimlessly until he stumbled across the taxi office. Luckily, the guy he stabbed didn't die, and they caught him right after he got home. The next day, one of the drivers told me his name was Duke, apparently a local troublemaker with a bad reputation and a temper. He'd been arrested before for beating up his wife. I don't know how long he was in jail that time, but I still see him around every now and then, walking down the street with that same ridiculous rat tail. I still remember the sound of his voice when he said, "It ain't like I killed nobody." That line stuck with me for weeks. I've worked plenty of night shifts before, but that one made me realize just how quickly boring can turn into something terrifying. A little over a year ago, I was working the overnight shift at a gas station near my house. I was 31 at the time, and yeah, I know how it sounds. A woman working graveyard shifts alone doesn't exactly scream safe career move. But honestly, it didn't seem like a big deal. The station was small, business was slow, and the sheriff's office was literally right across the street. Most nights I saw maybe 30 customers total, if that. It was one of those cold, quiet nights where time drags. Around 3:30 in the morning, I went outside to sweep the parking lot, empty the trash cans, and take a quick smoke break. I had one earbud in, just zoning out to music. That's when I noticed a man across the street in the parking lot of the sheriff's office. He was facing the wall, swaying a little, and from the way he was standing, I thought, is this dude seriously taking a piss on the side of the police station? The building was dark. They closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open again until 6 the next morning. But still, not exactly the best spot for that kind of thing. His ripped white t-shirt looked familiar. And then it hit me. He was the same creep who came in earlier that night, clearly drunk and trying way too hard to flirt. I just ignored him and went back to sweeping, pretending I hadn't noticed. A few minutes later, a car pulled into the lot. As I walked the customer out after they paid, I noticed the guy across the road was watching us, looking at the car, then at me, then back again. It made my stomach twist a little. After the customer drove off, I still had half a cigarette left, but the guy started shouting. I couldn't make out what he was saying, just angry words tossed into the night. The woman who'd just left told me to be careful, and I laughed it off, saying something stupid like, "He should be more scared of me." But I didn't feel nearly as casual as I sounded. He was pacing now, swaying and muttering, but I could see the way he was looking at me. That kind of wild-eyed look I've seen before in late-night regulars who've had too much to drink. The kind that never leads to anything good. I slowly walked back inside and locked the door behind me. I typed up a quick, temporarily closed sign and printed it out, just in case. I hadn't even taped it to the glass before I realized he'd crossed the street. He was on my side now, walking straight toward the store. My pulse jumped as I hurried to get the second door locked, just as he stumbled into the lot. He got right up to the door, and I motioned no with my hand and made the throat-cutting gesture like, "Sorry, closed, go away." He just stood there for a second, breathing hard, then turned like he was going to leave, but not before screaming something unintelligible at me. Not just yelling either. He was screaming, waving his arms, spitting out angry words I couldn't even make out through the glass. At that point, I knew he wasn't just some drunk fool. He was furious about something, and I was the only person around to take it out on. I ducked behind the counter, picked up the phone, and called the police. I told them I had a drunk, aggressive man outside trying to get in. They said they'd send someone right away. The second I hung up, I heard the door handles rattling. Then came the pounding, loud, desperate thuds that made the whole door shake. He was yelling again, slamming his shoulder against the glass, trying to force it open. The doors were thick, reinforced with metal frames, but every bang made my heart skip. I yelled through the door that the cops were on their way, thinking it might scare him off. Big mistake. He froze, stared at me through the glass, and then bolted. Just like that. Gone. The deputies showed up fast, lights flashing, but by then he'd vanished. They circled the block for over an hour, checked the side streets, even the alley behind the station, but there was no sign of him. It didn't make sense. He'd been on foot, clearly drunk, and there wasn't anywhere nearby to hide. He didn't hurt me, and the doors held, but the adrenaline stayed with me for the rest of the night. Even with the cops right across the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that he might come back. Every sound outside made me jump. I spent the next few months glancing over my shoulder constantly, especially when I went out to take the trash or grab something from the storage shed. I still think about that night sometimes. If I hadn't locked the door when I did, or if I hadn't noticed him crossing the road, I don't even want to imagine how things might have gone. Maybe I shouldn't have told him the cops were coming. Maybe he would have stayed until they caught him. But honestly, I'm just glad I walked away from that shift in one piece. I'm a patrol cop in Buffalo, New York. Night shifts, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I like the job. It pays the bills and most nights are routine. I've been lucky. I've never tased or shot anyone on duty, and I've got a lot of good friends at the department. I even married a coworker. But this July changed all that. It was around 12:30 a.m. and we were finishing up a traffic stop. My partner and I were outside the squad, walking back toward our cars when another vehicle flew past us. We followed and made a stop, heavily tinted windows. My partner and I got out. 2 other officers stayed in the car and approached the driver's side. A black man was behind the wheel, and a small boy was in the passenger seat. I noticed the kid wasn't buckled. I asked the driver how old the child was. He said 6 and told me it was his nephew. When I asked for ID, the man said he didn't have a license but had a photo on his phone. He handed it to me. The name on the picture read Davon Roberts. But the man in the photo was heavier and didn't really look like the guy in front of me. I told him it didn't seem to match. I ran his info on the MDT, mobile data terminal. Nothing. No valid license, no record. I walked back to the car and told him there's no license on file. He started to tremble and stammer, acting like he knew this was bad. I asked where he was going. Right there, he said, laughing, like he was dismissive. I told him he'd need to step out of the vehicle so we could run him more thoroughly, the polite way of saying he was under arrest. He didn't comply. He did the opposite. He slammed the car into gear and sped off. I grabbed the door to try to stop him. That moment is still burned into my head. The vehicle lunged forward, probably at least 60 miles per hour, and I was hanging on the edge of the car. I thought I was going to be dragged or smashed. The kid started crying. No child should ever go through that. When it was clear I couldn't get his attention or stop the car, the situation escalated to life or death. I drew my service weapon and fired at the driver. I don't remember the exact count of rounds in the heat of it. I only know I fired until the vehicle stopped. Both the driver and I went out of the car from the impact. I radioed shots fired repeatedly over the dispatcher channel. My first call in my head after rounds were through was for the child. I ran to the car, ignoring the pain and adrenaline. The boy was in the passenger seat. He wasn't hysterical. That calmness felt surreal. But he was alive, and as far as I could tell at that moment, unharmed. I extracted him from the vehicle and moved him to safety. Other units arrived quickly after my radio calls. They tended to the driver, who we later confirmed as Davon Roberts. Officers administered first aid, but he was transported and pronounced dead at the medical center. I was taken to the same hospital for my own evaluation and treated for the injuries from being dragged and thrown from the car. After the immediate medical stuff, the department briefed me on Roberts' background. They found a handgun under the driver's seat. They also filled me in about his recent legal situation. Roberts was identified as the half-brother of Jalen Griffin, a 12-year-old who had gone missing in 2020 and whose remains were found in April 2024. Roberts had been indicted in June on felony charges related to firing shots after a vigil for his brother in April. He'd pled not guilty and was out under supervision. There were also other violent incidents in his record. The child was reunited with his mother and released to her care. The vehicle and the scene were processed. After that, the internal and criminal reviews started, as they always do when an officer-involved shooting occurs. People ask if I'm sorry. I can't give a clean emotional answer that fits in a sentence. In the moment, I had seconds to decide. I had a suspect who fled a stop, was driving recklessly with a small child in the car, and then accelerated away while I was on the vehicle. I believed myself and the child were in imminent danger. I was trained to use force when necessary to stop an immediate threat. That's the training I relied upon. I'm not proud of the fact that I shot someone. I'm also not ashamed of trying to keep a 6-year-old from being hurt. This job forces you into terrible split-second decisions sometimes. That night is something I'll carry forever. It was the winter of 2012, and I was around 18 or 19, working weekend night shifts at a petrol station in a medium-sized English town. It wasn't a bad gig for someone still in college. Decent pay, quiet most of the time. But I hated that it meant missing out on Friday nights while my friends were out getting drunk or having fun. My weekends were spent behind the counter, serving the occasional drunk or half-asleep taxi driver under the harsh fluorescent lights. The station sat right across from a pub and next to an alley that led into a nearby housing estate. It wasn't the safest spot in town, but I'd never had any trouble before that night. Things started off as usual, stocking shelves, mopping floors, counting change. By 3 or 4 a.m., the streets were empty except for the glow of the pub sign and the faint hum of passing cars in the distance. I was restocking crisps when I noticed a man standing in the mouth of the alley. He wasn't close enough for me to see his face, just far enough back that the light didn't reach him. All I could make out was the outline of his coat and that he was facing directly toward me. At first, I figured he was waiting for a taxi, maybe drunk and too tired to move. I tried not to stare. I sat back behind the counter, scrolled through my phone, and killed some time with a game. When I looked up again, nearly an hour had passed. He was still there. Same spot, same stance, just watching. The station was dead quiet at that hour. No customers, no cars, nothing but the hum of the refrigerators behind me. The longer I stared at that dark silhouette, the more that instinctive fear crept in, that deep, sinking gut feeling that something wasn't right. But I told myself I was safe. The doors were locked until morning, and I had a solid counter and thick glass between me and him. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that he was waiting for me to slip up. Eventually, nature called, and I had to leave the counter to use the restroom. I hesitated for a moment but told myself he'd be gone when I came back. When I returned, I looked out the window, and he was still there, unmoving, watching. At that point, I decided not to do my last nightly task, which involved stepping outside to check the sand buckets and fire extinguishers. There was no way in hell I was going out there with that man still standing in the dark, so I just sat there behind the counter, staring back at him, counting the minutes until sunrise. Around 6 o'clock, I saw his shape move slightly. He didn't walk away in any normal sense. He just seemed to fade back into the shadows of the alley until I couldn't see him anymore. It took me a good 10 minutes before I was sure he was gone. Even when my coworker arrived to take over, I couldn't shake the unease. It was still dark out, and usually I'd walk the short 10 minutes home, but not that morning. I called for a taxi instead. I told my family and coworkers about it later that day. None of them had ever seen anyone like that near the station. They all agreed it sounded creepy, but told me it was probably just some drunk who got lost or was waiting for a ride. But something about it didn't feel that simple. I kept imagining him standing there in the alley, not moving for hours, just watching. For weeks afterward, I was jumpy on my shifts. Every small noise outside made me look toward that alley. Every shadow in the corner of my vision made my stomach twist. Nothing ever happened again, but I never felt completely comfortable working nights after that. By the next summer, when I got accepted into university, I quit that job for good. Even now, I sometimes think back to that night and wonder what he was doing there. Maybe he was just a drunk trying to find his way home. Or maybe he was waiting for me to open that door. It happened just a couple of nights ago on a Friday. I still can't quite shake it off. It was late, around midnight, and I was at home watching TV when I realized I didn't have any snacks left. My cupboards were completely empty. The only place nearby that was still open was this small gas station a few blocks away. I figured I'd make a quick walk there, grab something, and be back in 20 minutes tops. When I got there, the place was almost empty, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than usual. Behind the counter stood the cashier, a young-looking guy, but something about him was immediately off. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and though his face looked youthful, his skin had this strange, worn-out look, like someone who'd been living rough for years. His eyes caught me next. They had yellowish spots on them, not something you forget easily. Still, I told myself to stop overthinking. I just wanted a drink and a snack. I grabbed a couple of Gatorades, some chips, and made my way to the counter. He scanned the items slowly, and when I reached for my debit card, he gave me this wide smile. "You like those Gatorades?" he asked. I froze. His teeth, they didn't look right. Jagged and yellowed, almost too big for his mouth, like they were fighting for space in his jaw. Something about that grin felt completely wrong. Too wide, too rehearsed, like he was trying to mimic how people smile. I nodded a little, forcing a polite laugh, hoping he'd just finish ringing me up. He kept smiling as I paid, eyes locked on me the entire time. Then, just as the transaction went through, he said, "Hold on, I need to replace the printer paper." He disappeared into a back room, but I looked down at the card reader and noticed there was no printer paper slot anywhere near it. I'd been in that gas station before. There was no receipt printer behind the counter either. Something about the whole thing made my stomach turn. That's when I heard a noise behind me, the sound of a door being fiddled with. I turned around and saw another man by the entrance. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't a customer either. He was standing with his hand on the lock, twisting it shut. Every alarm in my head went off. I didn't even think. I grabbed my card from the reader and left the snacks on the counter. The man at the door turned toward me, and for a second, I saw the same strange yellowish tint in his eyes. I bolted forward, trying to push past him, but he blocked me, mumbling something I couldn't make out. I shoved him, hard, and he stumbled into one of the aisles, knocking over a rack of chips. In that split second, I heard footsteps coming fast from the back room. The cashier was coming back. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I lunged for the door, twisted the lock open, and ran outside. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I didn't stop running until I turned a corner and saw the glow of streetlights and a few passing cars. Only then did I realize I'd left my wallet and the snacks behind. When I looked back, the gas station door was closed again. No one followed me, but I swear I saw a face watching from behind the glass. Just a faint outline, but it was enough. I haven't gone back there since. I don't even walk that way anymore. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't acted on instinct, and honestly, I don't want to. All I know is that I'll never underestimate my gut again. Now I make sure I've got my groceries before the sun goes down.